Welcome, Larry Strattner. You wrote quite a book.
Thank you.
Nurse Maggie Cooper. This is marvelous. Larry, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, my daughter moved up here several years ago to go to Humboldt nursing school, and I came to visit her a few times, and I was quite taken by the area, the difference in where I'm from, which is the Midwest, all flat and everything, and the forest, and also the Native American heritage that's here. And so that kind of pushed me to try and think of some story that would have to do with nursing, the heritage, the area, all that, and thus the book.
I was really taken by the book because you brought in so many human relations aspects that really caused the reader to think. That was really good.
Thanks. I thought a lot about those different relationships, and of course the book, as you noticed, is fiction in the sense that it takes place in the future, and it's very possible that it could happen. That's one of the things that starts the people into relationships with one another, this new environment.
It was a new environment, all right. It was work together or perish.
Yes. And I read on one of my trips out of here on the airplane, I bought a book that was about Mavis McCovey. McCovey is a very common name around here among the Native American folks, and she was a medicine woman and talked in quite a bit of detail with the co-author of the book about her activity and what she learned and knew and did, and I used a lot of that in the book, along with a lot of other research. The book's heavily researched, even though it's heavily fiction.
One of the things that was particularly nice about the book is that by the time the reader gets into it a ways, you really think about the different cultures, the different way of thinking, and our imaginary differences.
Yeah, very much so. At the very end of the book, it says, there's a line that reads something like, there are a lot of different ways to heal people, and they're all valid. The ancient tribes have things they do that science has even proven are effective, and modern medicine has ways, and the other idea of the book is that in the future the two will draw upon each other to have a better result, a better healing result. That there are many things you can do to keep your health and to cure things that they can't do at the hospital or the doctor's office, but they can do elsewhere. And that drives a lot of the thinking in the book.
Well, the marriage of the old and the new, both in the moment and the marriage of the past and the future, came through very clear as well in other aspects besides medicine.
Yes, it's interesting because I've had discussions with people here who live here about the change in the composition of the population. We're seeing that all across the United States, where there are groups coming into what in the book I think I referred to a couple times as the new majority, because it's true. There are certain ethnic backgrounds and certain belief systems that are becoming much more prominent in the United States than they ever have been before, and it's going to change the balance of how we do things, and not to mention the fact that we get smarter and smarter, hopefully, about the Native American people have been here for thousands of years. You know, they know something we don't.
The thing that's so amazing about it, if we stopped and thought a moment, or even if we got into, say, Ancestry.com, we would find that many nations run through our veins, no matter who we are.
Yes, yes.
And how really silly it is for us to imagine that we're somehow different because we look a little different. I mean, we need to be a little different or nobody could tell us apart at all.
Right.
And if two people are exactly alike, one of them's unnecessary. But through the differences comes the contribution. It causes us to cross bridges and grow.
Yes. In the book, one of the main characters, Granny Longstreet, is a person like that, a Native American woman, partially, whose mom married a logger, which happened quite frequently back in the days when they were first opening the territory to logging, and there are lots and lots of genetic strains coming together here, and it's very interesting, and they pick up each other's cultural backgrounds and habits and some of their beliefs, and Granny's a good example of that kind of thing.
It was really quite wonderful to see the differences were cause for animosity in the book, and before you were through, they were cause for strength in the book, because all human beings have the same basic needs.
Yeah, yes. It's interesting. I hoped in the book, too, that some people have read the book and have said to me, well, you know, they weren't particularly comfortable with naming some of the different cultural groups, let's say, and ethnic groups, but where I tried to make the differentiation between people was not how they looked or what they believed, but in their economic position. You know, how we tend, a lot of cultures discriminate against poor people, for instance, and it doesn't matter who they are. They're just poor, and so we don't give them the same kind of level of attention and respect that we do for somebody who's more equal to us economically. And in my estimation, that's what's going to happen in America that is going to be very, cause a lot of change. As people who aren't wealthy and that's not the right word, who aren't economically viable, let's say, they're trying to rise up. And we see a lot of argument now about how we're not pushing enough of the wealth down to them. And they fight over jobs and money and things like that. Has very little relationship to color or belief or faith, any of that kind of stuff. And you see some of those people appear once in a while in the book, not much. There's one pretty heavy action sequence with the nurse where she fights her way away from some people like that, who, shame on me, because I used to be one. They happen to be bikers, bad bikers, and so she gets loose of that situation, and that's who those people are. People who are what I would call maybe takers, or people who want to get someplace that they're not currently.
Well, there will always be the people that are narcissistic and believe that they will have power over somebody weaker than them, and they will if they have to find a 2-year-old in the parking lot and take their candy.
Yeah, that's true. I actually have association with a 2-year-old, and you don't take his candy. not and have a good day afterwards.
But the irony is in the egocentrical position that somehow, some way, one person is more entitled to the human rights than another.
Yes.
which is really bizarre, because if you look into our bloodlines, we're more closely related, all of us, than we want to admit in our little wars of superiority.
Yes, and we won't. Yeah, there are always people who won't admit anything, but I think that too, it's healthcare, which is obviously a large part of the book, is also something that people, that everyone should have some access to. Just like the ability to make a living, people deserve to be healthy and live if they can. And so she, the nurse, kind of promotes that. And actually, I've started a second book already. I'm about, I don't know how far I am into it, but the young girl who appears in this book, Lola, is much more connected to Granny, the medicine woman, and Granny is really teaching Lola in depth about some of the ancient rites and giving her the knowledge, and that you see that developing in this book. But in the second book, I hope to move Lola more into an active mix of the medical science of today and of yesterday. That would be fun.
One of the things I really loved about your book is that despite the differences, the racial differences, the religious differences, and all the conflict, all through your book you did something very unique. You respected women. That was amazing. That isn't even culturally... women don't get that in too many cultures, let alone in a book, because women culturally have been second-class citizens, but not in your book. And I thought that was great. You also respected age. You turned the tables.
Yeah, it's interesting on the subject of the women. I've actually written several books that have women as the main protagonist, and one of them is about racing motorcycles, which I did. I had a lot of experience with it, and I wrote a book about it, and I got finished, and I said to a friend of mine, nobody's going to want to read this book. It's stupid. It's some guy riding around circles and doing things on a motorcycle. And I thought, you know what, though? It would be pretty interesting if it were a woman. And so I changed it over. And when I was actually racing motorcycles, I knew women, very few, who did it. And there's a young lady now who lives in Washington here, who's a national champion at that sort of thing. And so I made her the hero, and that turned out to be a really good book too. It was very, very interesting, because the women they have that, and same way with nurses. I've known quite a bit of nurses, and I checked a lot of my facts with nurses when I was writing the book, and let's just say they are very smart. And they have a lot of the attributes that are a lot of times attributed to women. That kind of ability to make you comfortable, make you feel like you're being nursed. And in many cases, doctors don't do that. They're smart people who understand symptoms and understand diagnosis, but they're not nurses. And I think nurses are pretty powerful people. And you talk to people who've been in the hospital. The guys always fall in love with their nurse. They don't fall in love with their doctor. Anyway, but
well, human empathy and caring is a very, very needed value. And of course, the gal in this book, Nurse Maggie, got it all.
Yeah, she does.
Yes, and she's courageous, and she's brave, and she's logical, and she's empathetic toward humans, animals, and life. So the principles for which she stands are really good.
Yeah, and she's from Humboldt County.
Oh, and that's really good.
we need more nurses like Maggie, and we've got them, a lot of them. You know, that's my experience too. So, yes, she's a very strong character.
There are a lot of wonderful people here in Humboldt County.
Yeah.
With or without anybody's bankroll or position or power. They're just honest, good people all by themselves. And you really hit the nail on the head when you chose her.
Those are all a fact. That's right. Yeah, and I enjoyed very much knowing her, and I think I'll stick with her for a while, too.
Well, Lola was a surprise because of all of the racial tensions and whatnot starting out in the book, to find a Caucasian child becoming a medicine woman and connecting with nature and the earth and with animals on a basic level was refreshing, because we all have it in us. But it gets lost somewhere along the way by definition of shoulds and shouldn'ts.
Yes, I'm Lola's an interesting, I'm not much of a psychologist, I'm more of a guy who makes up stories, but Lola is somebody who, there's a line in the book where either Nurse Maggie or Granny tells Lola, as she's going out to call or to make health care stops at some of the rancherias and places like that, you got to be careful how you deport yourself, because nobody's taken any directions from a papoose, because she's a little girl, she's young, and she's coming along, and it's interesting how she learns to kind of fit in and be helpful, and I think that, and to your point earlier, that's where it begins, you know, when you learn to work together and you see past a lot of the prejudice, you know, that we all sort of have.
I thought it was really cool that in order to survive in your futuristic book, people had to offer or return something, even though it wasn't demanded. It was expected, and if they didn't do it, they weren't going to be able to get a free ride. People had to do the best they could with what they had, where they were at the time. Yes,
and there were many examples of what I guess you would call barter, where because in my estimation, when the economic structure collapsed, money wasn't around, and it wasn't worth much, and so people would trade what they had for something else. And there were a couple places in the book where even Nurse Maggie said, I will give you X dollars worth of goods for this thing, and rather than I'll pay you money or anything. So yeah, it gets down to the very basics, and it recognizes at the end of the book there's a thing called the Redwood Trading Association or something like that, recognizing that when you begin to trade again, you start to get some fabric to your civilization. Because everything that anyone can give has a value.
Yes. So if you fulfill each other's needs by swapping, then everybody has a value. And of course, it's interesting that the paper money that we have, suddenly you couldn't spend it, you couldn't eat it, you couldn't plant it, it wouldn't grow, it was valueless. Right. You had to find human values or not survive.
Yes, and even, you know, I never consciously did it, but that also includes work.
Yes.
If you can help someone work at something, that is a valuable thing to exchange. You know, the value of labor is good.
And that, of course, goes along with our skills and our trades and even our capacity to lift or to tend a child. Anything we have has a value. And this has come out really well in your writing. But not necessarily as I am saying it, but as it laced through the book,
Yeah.
that we all have something to give, but let us give it with integrity, dependability, acceptance.
And maybe trust. Because it also talks at the end of the book where the different medicine women that they contact with during the book get more comfortable, trust them, understand them, and start to tell them things that they know. And that sharing of knowledge is a big deal too. Although again, after the book is all written and I did a story and told about some people, you know, you could read a little more into it than I was conscious I was doing, you know. I mean, but yeah, it's those are things that I believe in anyway, cooperation and sharing and getting together to get things done.
Well, you talk about integrity and dependability. Those are the foundation for trust. When you're working with somebody and they're going to come through or they're not.
Yeah.
It doesn't take very long. You know exactly where they stand,
Yes.
with or without money. You know exactly whether they're going to be there for you or not.
That's very true.
And that's a pretty good dividing line.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yes.
I think the initial decision of when the money stopped, or payment, or whatever you want to call it, the idea of the book was that social services and structures break down.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you don't have police. I mean, you rely on a lot of these people to keep your life the way it is, and if all that goes away, all of a sudden you need people that are willing, as you said, to just step up and do something. And the nurse made a big decision to stay when a lot of people like her were leaving.
Yes.
For safer
Territory.
and other places where they felt they could get along better. But she stayed, and that right there is a big deal.
I love the way that you're so familiar with Humboldt County. I've been so many of the places that you mentioned. So I was going there in my mind all over the county when all of these things were taking place, and I thought, whoa.
Well, you know what's very interesting? I did work to make the book plausible. And the one thing that's different, if you're from where I'm from, out east, the world is a lot flatter, and is the best way to say it. And so this book is kind of amusing in spots because I got into arguments with people from here while I was writing it who said, you can't get from Rio Del to Eureka in 20 minutes. You know, like that. And because I talk about all the different places she goes and travel around here. So I fished around and I finally figured out that she had bicycles hidden that she rode, and which helped her to get longer distances and things. But that was tough for me, and so she's doing some heavy travel here too, and that's kind of interesting. If you were a local person and you read the book, you'd stop and think about that a little bit, you know. But these are tough people too. There are no iPhones, and so it gets a little bit dicey, you know, the communication and the all of that sort of thing that we've grown so accustomed to is gone.
Larry, what kind of books are you writing now, and where are you going with them?
Currently, I'm, as I mentioned, working on a sequel to Nurse Maggie Cooper. I've also written a couple of adventure books. I wrote a book. My first book I ever wrote was called The Geek Assassin, and it was about this guy like me with glasses and not in very good shape, and he was a writer by trade, and he got hooked into going around and shooting people who were horrible. And that book turned out to be quite funny. and quite effective, and a lot of people who've read that have really enjoyed it. And I'm in the midst of writing another one of those too. Nice. You like people to read your books and have a good experience and have fun.
There's a human quality that really comes through in your writing, and it's a valid human quality. The courage, the integrity, you're getting people to think about what it means and what it doesn't mean to not have honesty and integrity with each other. If you're going to be in a world where you can't buy your way out of it, you can't steal your way out of it anymore because somebody is going to stop you permanently, you better come up with some quality or you're not going to make it. And that is laced through this book. There's a message in this book. And this book tells us no matter what blood flows through our veins, no matter what our complexion is or isn't, no matter what we weigh or how short or tall we are, we have some quality and we better dig it up and use it, or we're not going to make it in the future. That's what comes through in this book, and I love this book for this reason. And one doesn't realize that until you're almost through. You say, hey, this is a powerful course in human relations. And you call it fiction. I call it thought-provoking.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Structure is important, and the Motorcycle Girl book that I mentioned is interesting because its structure is she does something and then someone else in her family, like her mother or her father, comments on it and says, I always thought she was good at this, and then she says, and here's the lesson that I learned. So the entire book is divided into like 12 lessons for success generally in life based upon what she does with the motorcycle. So that is a little bit interesting too. And
you call yourself a fiction writer.
Yeah, well I am.
Well, according to the details, but I think you're kind of a philosopher.
I make everything up.
Well, yeah, but the human compassionate geek in there is real in that author.
Ah.
And that flows in your book. At least flows in this one. It might flow in all of them. Because I think that's who you are.
To a degree, probably.
To a degree, yes. Yes, the author comes through. I want to thank you for a great interview.
You're welcome.
And a great book.
Thank you.
It's really nice. So, thanks a lot.
And thank you for reading.